Hi everybody, I feel like I should have written a shorter intro. Some of that was written by ChatGPT. It's all true, but it was written by ChatGPT. So thanks for giving me your time this afternoon. One of the things we're going to do today is we're going to dispel some of the myths around AI. We're going to leave you with a way of thinking about AI which is slightly different to the way you think about it right now. And we're going to give you some of the terminology that you need to know that you can go back to your organisations and bring that education back into your world. Now, before we carry on, we've heard today, we heard the minister mention AI. We heard an ethics professional mention about AI. We heard the Crime and Corruption Committee talk about AI. AI is currently everywhere. But from an Australian standpoint, where are we? Well, anybody been to Melbourne recently? Perfect, thank you. That could have gone wrong, thank you. So in Melbourne, in the city of Melbourne, right now, there is an AI algorithm optimising the placement of parking attendants in the city of Melbourne, in the words of the city of Melbourne, to optimise the available car parking spaces in the city. Right? You draw from that what you will, and that leads into an ethical discussion, but that's a different matter. If we stick in Victoria, the area of Brimbank is using cameras on the front of waste trucks to continuously monitor the status of the roads and the walkways. They have a closed-loop predictive maintenance algorithm which allows them to identify problems, automatically allocate it to a contractor, have the contractor go out and address it, take the photos, prove it's done, resubmit it, close the work order. If we move around the country slightly, in New South Wales, a number of LGAs in New South Wales use algorithms about COVID to track the movement of COVID across their state, prepare their relevant health buildings and health helpers to be able to get in front of the COVID streams. That algorithm was developed by UTS. It used statewide data, it used Google search data. They say as early as 3 weeks into the COVID pandemic, in the US in particular, they were able to determine which group of people were going to get COVID next. Right? Quite amazing. As we keep going, in Queensland at the moment, in Moreton Bay, they are also using cameras on the front of their waste trucks to manage the road maintenance. But they've also had in place for a number of years Mandy and Sandy. Mandy and Sandy are AI-driven bots. Those bots help you with fence disputes and tree disputes. They have historically been, if any of you have ever put in a bot before the last 12 months, when you put in a bot, it relies on natural language processing. Some of the experience is clunky, it's not great. The lady who was just up on stage talking about customer service wasn't a great customer service experience, right? Those times are changing. Queensland LGAs in particular have adopted ChatGPT style additions to those bots. The language that they use is much more akin to the LGAs themselves, how they communicate and all their other means, and their depth and ability to interrogate the information they have to answer those questions has improved dramatically. As we go into the Northern Territory, the Department of Environment are currently using drone footage with computer vision algorithms to be able to assess the movement of fauna and the degradation of flora across the state in a way that has never been possible before. This is allowing them to maintain lands, maintain flora, manage things such as not deforestation, but burning practices and a number of other aspects, all using AI and computer vision in the background. They're able to predict what's going to happen next. And then we have, at the bottom there in the centre, we've got an example in federally, the Bureau of Meteorology. That's a radar station. That's one of 47 radar stations that give you the weather on your mobile phone or what you see on the news. Those stations are monitored constantly for any sign of degradation in performance so they can minimise the amount of downtime that happens to those radars. The reason and motivation behind that is a longer story, but they do that. And then lastly, in the middle there, South Australia manage and track which types of cars use which part of the road network within 5 kilometres of the CBD, and they do so because it enables them to predictively understand when the road is going to need to be repaired, how much oil they're going to need to buy to put in the bitumen, and then to pre-buy the oil at a discounted price. Saves them millions of dollars. So this is happening. And these are just the Australian examples. In the US, Las Vegas are using it to manage cybersecurity. In Boston, they're using it to understand the planning implications of introducing bike lanes into the city. AI is pretty much everywhere at the moment. So when we look at this and we think about other places, what about WA? And what are our unique challenges? What are for you guys? Should you be using AI? Well, if we think about some of the interesting aspects, if we drew a straight line from Denmark up near Wyndham, that's 2,500 kilometres as the crow flies. I've had the pleasure of driving around our country with my family with a caravan. I've spent a lot of time in WA. It's not 2,500 k's to get from Denmark up to Wyndham when you're driving in a car and a caravan. It's a lot further. Some of you have 2 people in your LGA. You rely on volunteers. Some of you are in the middle of nowhere. You have small populations. Can you really, really leverage AI to provide a better citizen experience and a more fulfilling experience for your members of staff? Well, let's think about a couple of examples that are common to all of you. Number 1, every single one of you has a development team. Every single one of you has a set of citizens who are looking to add pergolas, put in driveways, add an extension to the house, put in a swimming pool. Every single one of you has to go through exactly the same process of having a drawing submitted. That drawing is pushed back because it's a crappy drawing, doesn't have the right annotations on it, doesn't meet any particular engineering laws, anything like that. So your team are spending their time doing what is essentially a meaningless activity and a very low usage of their skills. Right here in WA, a small engineering firm who do exactly the same thing. They're the precursor to you guys in your LGAs. They were taking drawings and then they were taking those and going for approval on behalf of the customer, decided that they would try and address this particular problem. So one of the things they did was we helped them design an algorithm, and that algorithm uses machine learning and deep neural networks to look at a piece of paper, understand the drawing, assess whether the drawing is detailed enough to be assessed in the first place, so whether it's drawn in pencil with gaps in it and so forth, right? And if it is, it will then assess that against building laws, regulations, soil types, Shire-specific regulations, and it'll do it all in seconds. They had a team of 40 people based in the Philippines who were there with the big books, which are about this thick, right, around engineering regulations in WA, and those people would assess those things. They pre-assess them so that the engineers here in WA could do the important bits, right? They could do the estimation, they could do the negotiation with you guys. Their ability now, they can service 10 times as many customers with the same number of people. 10 times. For you guys, anyone who's got a backlog in that particular space, part of that backlog would just disappear, like that, right? Apologies for the clicking, that reminds me of Thanos. Any of you are Marvel fans? That was a bad choice of reference. So that sort of stuff is extremely possible. Another example around customer service, the bot example. Now if you have a bot, it's not a clunky feeling as much anymore. Now you can have a bot that can speak any language that it has in its repertoire. So we have a bot, for example, that speaks Mandarin, Hindi, Bhaza, a number of other aspects, right? And it uses and reads all the information that you can pass into it in a way that a graduate would, right? So your bot acts much more akin to how a graduate would and uses the same language in its communication than you would ever have before. We're not talking about taking a human out of the loop here, quite the opposite. We're talking about taking the low-value tasks off those humans so they can focus on the high-value tasks. And not one of you in this room will be able to tell me that you have too many people, right? So that's what we're looking for in the world of AI. So how should you think about AI? What should we be considering in this regard? What's important to you? When I asked AI to tell me the biggest 4 challenges for CEOs in LGAs, right, I get, and I will read this so that we don't get it wrong, dealing with political disputes and government inquiries, attracting and retaining skilled workers in regional, rural and remote locations, managing aging infrastructure and environmental issues, and meeting rising community expectations and demands for services. So we've already covered a bit of meeting community demands and rising demands for services. You are, in that regard, no different to any other organisation on the planet. Right? As more cloud-first businesses come online, their ability to create a tailored, fast, unique experience far outstrips that of anything that originally came from brick and mortar. Doesn't matter which industry you're in, right? You guys are further hamstrung by the fact that you are government agencies and you need to attract the best people to be able to do these things, who understand how to do it in the first place. There's a whole bunch of challenges in there. When we think about managing aging infrastructure, we've talked about some of that already. But you can combine things such as the Internet of Things with AI. You can measure and check and audit things on a frequency that was previously completely impossible. So your ability to be able to put a camera somewhere and check on the same thing that you send somebody out to check once a year, and you can check it with that camera and the AI will check it and check for changes for you every 5 minutes, every 1 hour, whatever you want to do, perfectly possible. When we had the Crime Commissioner, Emma was up here earlier. Emma put up a slide, and that slide said, here's all the major red flags. And prior to that, there was a slide that says, here's all the topics that we look for. Right? You internally will run processes that allow you to check for some of those things, once, maybe twice a year. Right? AI will enable you to check every week, every day. Right? It doesn't take the human out of the loop because, as we'll see in a minute, there are some risks that are associated with this that are really important. And a couple of the risks that we should think about here, and the opportunities, are, of course, intertwined. So the way that I would like you to think about AI when you leave this room is the top 2 things on this list. Right? It is an accelerator to a digital process. So if you have a digital process now, you can move faster. One of the conversations I was having earlier, if you're moving from a manual to a digital process, so you're adopting a system to replicate a physical process, chances are you might get a 2 to 3x improvement in the speed of that process. You'll definitely get more consistency, that's the theory, but you'll get a 2 to 3x experience. With AI, if you can embed that into the process, you could have 100x, 200x. There is no limit on what you do. It's an amplifier of a particular process. So an amplifier of the good, that's a great thing to have. An amplifier of the bad, that's a media story. So, other things to consider around AI, brilliant data capture tool. Sound, vision, sentiment, analysis, huge swaths of data, being able to process all of these things, interpret them, bring you back up a rationalized explanation of something, a summarized version of something, absolutely brilliant. Right? And in the past 12 months, what it's become really, really good at is it's become really good at removing the barriers in some of your communications. So before, like I said, if in the example of a bot, if you wanted to put a bot into your business to talk from your data to your citizens, it would speak in one language. Now, it doesn't care. You could swap languages in the conversation. It doesn't care, right? That's what those large language models are getting to. And that removes some of those barriers. For those of you who are in rural areas, I was sat outside the group who were going into the wheat belt conversation earlier. I wasn't listening, that sounds a little bit seedy. I was just sat outside. For you guys out there in the wheat belt, your citizens aren't necessarily engaging, of course, across digital means all the time. The line at the bottom could be the ability to text a number, ask a question, get a response back. Right? Call a phone number. Speak to somebody. You can make that somebody sound exactly the same as your favorite member of customer service if you want to, right? But it's the same now as it always has been when we talk about service bots like that. The most important design in those bots is how you go from talking to the bot to a person, right? Always the same thing. Okay, so it sounds good. Let's talk about some risks. These are very Australian examples of risks, right? Anybody heard of Robodebt before? Yeah? Robodebt, current parliamentary inquiry. Arguably a very clever algorithm that went through, found everybody who received a Centrelink payment, then analysed who shouldn't have received a payment, found 400,000 people, and initiated the process to recover $750 million from those people. Wrong 400,000 people, right? That's how the news article comes out, with a picture of Robocop on the front. That is a terrible number, 750 million. 400,000 is a worse number. One thing to take into consideration is they did recover $10 billion that was correctly recovered, right? So the algorithm was wrong. What they chose to do, and the ethics around this and the questionable part, is they chose to use an autonomous closed-loop system. So the system identified where the problem was, the system allocated that job out, that system executed the initial communications around that job. There were stories, and they're available through the parliamentary inquiry, about the impact that had to people's lives who were part of that 400,000. Those stories are not positive, a lot of them. On the right, we have something which really we should laugh about, but was a bit disappointing, right? And it links back to Simon's talk at the beginning of the day. There is another parliamentary inquiry going on at the moment into the big four firms. Nobody can escape that. It's been in the news a lot. As part of that parliamentary inquiry, the parliamentary inquiry called some academics who are specialists in the detail and research of the use of Big Four in government. Those academics sat there as expert witnesses and quoted examples of when the Big Four had engaged parts of the government and carried out activities. And they used that as evidence as to them doing the wrong thing. Those things never happened. They'd asked ChatGPT for that information. ChatGPT hallucinated, it's called, and created use cases which were completely untrue. The bit that's almost sad and laughable about this, and links back to Simon this morning, is Simon used a phrase to explain somebody's approach to not doing the right thing of, I didn't see it, right? The lead academic in this stepped forward and he said, I didn't see it. I should have checked. I hold my hands up. As a parliamentary inquiry, that piece of evidence is now gone, out the window. So, we've seen some benefits, we've seen some risks, we've seen some activities that are being done. So what do we mean when we talk about AI? So first up, we're going to talk about narrow AI. Narrow AI is also called weak AI, which is, depending on how you look at it, a good and a bad thing. But weak AI is the thing that we see everywhere at the moment. So your Netflix recommendations, what you buy on Amazon, your Siri, your Alexa, your Amazon, how you log into your computer with your face, your phone, that's all narrow AI. It does one thing, right? One thing. It does one thing really well, but one thing. Within this field of artificial intelligence and narrow AI, we have machine learning, so it kind of, I think it's fair to call it accelerated statistics, but they're prediction engines. Right? They predict an outcome based upon a history of data. And they move into varying categories underneath that. Then we have natural language processing, of which a subset is large language models, which are your ChatGPTs, your Bard. If you're an Elon Musk fan, you've got your Gort, I think it was, that was announced 2 days ago. You've got speech in here, vision, the ability to turn speech into something that a machine can understand, the ability for the machine to turn it back into something a human can understand, the ability to take a picture, understand video, turn that into data, understand what's in that image, and then send it back again is under the vision category. So for many of you, the fact that this is capable of doing all of these things may seem very daunting, right? And I understand that. But this is weak AI, right? So what's coming next is something called general AI, or strong AI. And what strong AI does, it has the ability to bring these things together. It is human-level thinking, right? So we have a machine that can do human-level thinking. It doesn't really understand itself, but it can bring multiple things to bear at any one point in time to address a particular problem. So that's quite a powerful idea, right? And arguably, that's a very valuable idea as well. Because you're stating an objective, you're asking the machine to do it, that machine is able to bring to bear all of these things and more, and it's able to come up with an answer. And that's exciting, because when I think about problems around sustainability, a particular passion of mine, the ability to ask a machine to help me solve problems around sustainability by applying multiple aspects and giving me multiple pieces of advice to go and collect more information to feed it more information is a positive outcome. But what people like Elon Musk and a number of other tech leaders are scared about is something called super AI, right? Should all be in the name, really, shouldn't it? But super AI transcends human thinking. Whereas in strong AI, we have the ability to essentially put 100 experts in a room all jammed into one machine, super AI goes beyond that. It says, why should I think the way that I'm being told to think? What are the objectives I'm trying to achieve? How can I rethink what I'm doing to achieve those? If you start to liken these things to films, narrow AI is any sort of film that you've seen where you've got you're talking to something, right? Or you're using cameras to track things or anything like that. General AI is, depending on the decade you want to reference, it's HAL 9000 in Space Odyssey. It is Skynet in Terminator, or it is Ava in Ex Machina, an incredibly interesting movie. Super AI, there isn't really a movie about yet, and the closest likening I could get to the concept of super AI was, if you've ever seen the movie Lucy, there's a scene at the end of Lucy where she is able to harness 98% of her brain capacity, right? And the theory being that at 98%, her brain is essentially evaluated. She doesn't need feelings, doesn't need emotions, she doesn't care about physics, she doesn't care about all the things that bind us as human beings to the physical world. So that's what they're worried about. But the reason they're worried is because they have no idea, right? Nobody knows. So anybody who tells you this is when it's going to happen, just don't know. Just don't know. Okay. So, importantly, when you go back today, how do you know whether you are ready to adopt AI in any shape or form? And this is what I live for personally, but there's a few things to consider. If we think about the accelerator and the accelerator pedal that this can apply, there's a few things you need to be really good at. You need to be good at being able to define a problem. You need to be good at being able to define what happens if it goes wrong, right? Because we're talking about something with the accelerator right to the floor. If it goes wrong big, right? If it goes right, it can be fantastic. And one of the ways you do that is becoming really good at governance. So governance will bring in your ethical components, it'll bring in your responsibility components. It's assigning very clearly accountabilities to varying people across your organization in any cycle related to artificial intelligence. Right? Then we have readiness. Readiness I put separately because when we talk about readiness in this context, we're not just talking about your readiness to be able to put something in place, we're talking about your readiness to adopt it. We're talking about your citizens' acceptance of those particular solutions. We're talking about the fact that if you put an AI in place, and AI is not just for Christmas, you have to look after it over time. You have to keep adjusting it, adapting it. Right? You need to be able to do that. On the top right, we've got ethics. AI ethics pops up all the time. You can find books, papers, a number of other things on AI ethics. But what we really talk about when we talk about ethics in the context of AI is if I was to say to you now, what are the ethical standpoints of your organization, and you can't answer that, and then I'm going to tell you we're going to move 100 times faster, what do you think is going to happen? Right? So ethics are not about AI, they're about you being clear on what your ethics are, because if we move 100 times faster, you need to have a very strong standpoint. And the only way you can do this across your organization is education. And I don't mean going off and learning, right? We had a great pitch from ECU earlier, that was a fantastic pitch. But what I'm talking about is the context of communicating to people in your organization what AI is, how to define an opportunity, how to understand whether you're ready for that, how to understand what your policy is on ethics, and then to be able to move from that point forward. That's going to decrease your risks. And I think that is all from me. So thank you very much.
That was really good. Thank you. AI, I think a lot of people get scared by it. I don't think they necessarily need to, but it is something that we do need to sort of step back and take a bit of respect and go, it is something that we need to look at with respect. If you do have a question, we've got just a little bit of time for questions. Feel free to submit them through the app, or we might have time to run around the room. I'm going to throw a curly one at you. So my background is digital marketing and social media.
Perfect.
Meta has come out this week and said, generative AI, political advertising, no go. Right? So you touched on generative AI. You might need to explain that one just a little bit, but generative AI, political advertising, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, first up, AI has been around since 1956. 15 years ago, there's a special group in the Russian military who were creating imagery, videos, and news stories that were being inserted into the media across Europe to explain events that were happening that never actually existed. They diverted attention from defense forces in other countries to particular locations with what Donald Trump would now call fake news. Right? So when we talk about the usage of generative AI, what we're talking about is an accelerator, again, and a de-skilling of the people who can create that information. The people who created it 15 years ago were developers, designers, engineers, and a number of other people. Up until 12 months ago, most people thought about AI represented 2% of the population, were extremely technically minded, and had huge, huge brains, right, that dedicated to this particular task. 12 months ago, generative AI turned up, ChatGPT turned up, and now the 98% of the rest of the world know about AI all of a sudden, right? And they're able to use these tools to generate content and creation moving forward. But, as we talked about earlier in a couple of the examples, doesn't always tell the truth, hallucinations, as they are called. You can have your discussion around creative licenses here as well, around what information you should be using and why you should use it when it was somebody else's originally. That one's a bit of a difficult conversation to have. But the idea of generative AI in political, this is very difficult. If you watch the American elections and the American political scene, I don't think you need to worry about generative AI. Right? So I'll stick with that particular answer.
All right, that's a good one. All right, we've got this one. Democratization of AI is putting a lot of the capabilities you've spoken about today into the hands of individuals. How do we position ourselves to handle individuals in our communities who are gaining access to such powerful data, harvesting disinformation, fraud, impersonation capabilities, and may soon be harnessing and deploying them with ill intentions?
It's a very good question. I'd be interested to know, whoever asked the question, whether you feel it is an LGA's responsibility to be able to deal with that problem. I don't think it is, well, it's, in my opinion, not an LGA problem at all. How do we as a society deal with the fact that there are potential bad actors out there who have access to this capability to carry out activities, and now it's more accessible than it ever was? It's a good question. I don't think anybody really knows the answer at the moment. My opinion would be that we focus as much effort into working out how to police these things. There are the ADF, as well as many other defence forces, have budgets that are almost equal in allocation to building policing AI as they are to building AI. Unfortunately, when you're building AI to understand a problem or capture data or do anything else, it is normally motivated by means which are not necessarily offset by people's designs to capture it, doing the wrong thing. One's always a bit further ahead. So I don't think there really is an answer, which is a terrible answer for whoever asked the question, so I apologise.
And I think we might have to leave it at that one.
Okay.
Give Dan Hookham a round of applause.